Hello and welcome to the daily newspaper analysis. Today we shall be discussing the newspaper of the 19th of February. So coming to the first article, directing reforms. Now this editorial is very important. It has much relevance for UPSC because the context is very important that recently the Supreme Court has imposed an additional disclosure norm for candidates contesting elections. This will include the sources of their incomes, their spouse's incomes and their dependents' income. Now what does this mean is that whenever a person wants to fight an election, he has to file some nomination papers with the election officer. In these nomination papers, he has to make some disclosures about himself. For example, he has to make a disclosure about his family members, his marital status. This was something that was in news because Prime Minister Modi had to make disclosures about his wife. Another disclosure is with regards to educational qualifications, some criminal cases if there are pending against this person. And another disclosure is with regards to the assets that a person holds. Now, this is a major reform here is that not only a person now has to disclose his assets, but also has to disclose about the source of these assets. So this is a major development. It is a huge reform which has happened. So that is the context. Another thing is that the verdict also talks about establishing a permanent mechanism to investigate any unexplained disproportionate increase in the assets of legislators during their tenure. So again, this is a major development. Now coming to some background about this entire issue. First and foremost, what you need to know is about this verdict itself. Now this verdict has been given by a two-judge Supreme Court bench, and it was after a petition was filed by an NGO. The name here is important, Lok Prahari. In this regard, it had filed a petition and the Supreme Court has given a verdict in this regard. Indeed, it is a step in bringing about more transparency in the election process. It is in restoring purity of the election process. So these are some key words which you can use. Now coming to some other reforms. Now here you need to understand that for some time Supreme Court has been championing the cause of electoral reforms in the country. Now it is seen that often the parliamentarians, because they are themselves stakeholders in this regard, they are reluctant in bringing about these reforms. So this has been taken up by the Supreme Court. It is a case of some degree of judicial activism also. So that is something that you need to know. Some other reforms which the Supreme Court had advocated is in the past is one is Nota reform. Supreme Court had said that every electronic voting machine should have an option of none of the above for voters who want to choose this. So this is something that is important. Another thing which is very relevant in the recent past is that the Supreme Court had recently struck down a clause that saved sitting legislators from immediate disqualification upon conviction. Now in the past there was a law under the Representation of People's Act that if a person is convicted of a particular crime, then he could still continue his position in the parliament or in the legislature till a final judgment by the Supreme Court is only given. So this provided a blanket ban to such kind of criminal politicians, and it increased criminalization in politics. This was something that the Supreme Court had done away with, and now as soon as a person is going to get convicted by even a lower court, at the same moment he is going to get disqualified from the position he is holding in the legislature. So that was a remarkable step taken by the Supreme Court. So these are the three major judgments which you need to focus upon. One is about the disclosure, second is Nota, and third is about eliminating this blanket ban on disqualification of legislators on conviction. So this is something that you need to know. Now coming to the issues which is important with regards to this entire editorial. The first is that the Supreme Court has viewed the right to vote as an expression of every individual, which is protected under the fundamental right of freedom to expression. Now freedom to expression is a fundamental right under Article 14, which gives 6 freedoms. Amongst them is the freedom of expression. So that is something that you need to know. Another thing which is very important, that under this right to vote, which is also a fundamental right here, is also the right to know. So this is something that is vital, that whenever a person wants to vote, he should have complete informed it should be sort of an informed consent. He should know all the relevant details about all the contestants whom he is voting for. So it is in this regard that these kind of disclosures is what is mandated. So this is something that is vital. Another issue which has been highlighted in the editorial is with regards to a recent trend of amassing of wealth by politicians. Now it is often seen that within a tenure, the nomination papers filed by a politician before he held a particular position, had 1 degree of assets, and when he is filing these nomination papers again, then there is a sudden rise in the assets of the politicians. So this was something that was a major cause of concern, and this is something that is now going to be addressed, not only because it is going to be mandatory to disclose, but also because now the permanent mechanism is going to be set up to look into this kind of a matter, and it will periodically examine it. So that is something that is important. Another thing that is vital for us is the need for new norms. Now here you need to know that time and again there are being demands that there are some new norms which need to be made to put some checks on the lawmakers themselves, because they gain some unusual access to public funds, they gain unusual access to loans. So all of this is something that needs to be regulated to some degree. So that is one case which has been made in this editorial also. Another aspect is with regards to strengthening of this new rule. Now this is something that is again a very important analysis. Now if this was simply a norm that disclosure has to be made without any teeth, then it would not have had some relevance. But it has immense relevance because under the Representation of People's Act, which is directly mentioned in your syllabus, so this is important. Under the Representation of People's Act 1951, it has a section 123 which talks about the corrupt practices on which disqualification can be done. So now if a person who's filing his nomination papers is failing to make this disclosure about the sources of his assets, then he is liable to be convicted under section 123 of the Representation of People Act, and he can be disqualified from holding elections, so that or for fighting elections. So that is something that is important here. That is the power of this particular norm. That is the impact of this norm. So that is something that is important for you. Another thing is that with regards to judicial legislation, now it is being also criticized by one section that this is a stark case of judicial legislation. Now you should know that legislation is the power of the parliament. However, if the Supreme Court here has asked the centre to frame new rules in this regard, so it is something that is going to become akin to a judicial legislation. But this is something that the Supreme Court itself has justified, and it is said that such practices, these norms are already present with the parliament, and already the parliament is very much enabled to bring about this slight reform. So it is not that a new law is something that needs to be made, only some minor amendments is what is required. For example, a new nomination form is something that will have to be made, so it is a minor tweaking. So Supreme Court has said that this is not a case of judicial legislation. So that is an analysis. Another thing is with regards to a lack of clarity. Now the permanent mechanism that the Supreme Court has mooted is somehow having a lack of clarity, because the Supreme Court has not said or mentioned about who shall be chairing this permanent commission, or how will it be working, what will be the mandate. None of these clarifications is what has been given. So at present, it is to be debated between the centre as well as the Election Commission of India. Indeed, you can understand that this permanent mechanism is something that needs to be very independent. It needs to be an autonomous body outside the influence of the government. So indeed, that is one debate which requires some more clarity. So that is something that has been highlighted in the editorial. The final opinion here would be that a fully informed electorate and a transparent candidature will be the key components of future elections in India. So that is a good analysis, good opinion. So that is the relevance of this editorial. As I mentioned, the topic is very, very important for this year mains. Coming to the next topic, doctors for rural India. Now the context here is that there is little or no access to healthcare in the rural areas. Now this is a major problem which India is facing. Here are some facts is what you should know. That as per the WHO norm, there should be one doctor for every 1,000 of the population. Now, this is something that is not being followed in India. In India, the ratio is that there is one doctor available for 1,700 patients. And not only that, this is a skewed ratio because of these doctors that are available also, they are largely concentrated in the urban areas, and so this ratio further decreases in rural areas, and indeed this is a major cause of concern. So that is the context. Now in this regard, the editorial discusses about creating a new cadre of health professionals, and the editorial has advocated that a new cadre of health professionals is something that is much needed and indeed should be created at a mission mode approach. So that is something that is important. Another aspect here I forgot to mention in the context is that the rural areas comprise a population of 600 million. So you can clearly understand that how much is the demand for doctors. Another thing that you should do is that you should link it to the National Health Protection Scheme. Yesterday also I had discussed an article on the National Health Protection Scheme where we had analyzed that how the scheme is going to be a failure if the supply side constraints is something that is not addressed. So in those supply side constraints also, there is a supply side constraint of doctors. In India, there is a need of approximately 5 lakh newer doctors. So that is something that you should know. Now coming to the issues which are relevant, first and foremost, the new cadre of health professionals which has been advocated. Now this is not an idea that is new. Many are saying that this is an idea that is under the National Medical Commission bill, but that is not the case. This is something that is being explored for long. It was envisaged previously also that a 3 to 3.5 year course is something that is going to be set up to establish a new cadre of health professionals who shall be specifically focusing on the rural population and primary health care. But however, because of objections from the MBBS community or the allopathic doctors, this is something that has not been realized. So that is the issue here. Another thing is, a mention has been made of the licensed medical practitioners. Now, this was a cadre of professionals, the LMPs, who were working in India before India's independence. Up till 1946, they were active. However, in the year 1946, there was a committee formed which is known as the Boer Committee. Now, this committee had done away with this cadre because at that point, the committee envisaged that India is going to be able to create more and more doctors. The committee at that point couldn't foresee that the present scenario, and it couldn't imagine that even after 70 years of India's independence, there is still going to be a scarcity of 5 lakh doctors. So as a result of which, many people who advocate that this cadre shouldn't be made because the Boer Committee had rejected it. So for them, a rebut has been given that the Boer Committee couldn't envisage the condition, else such kind of recommendation would not have been made. So that is one important analysis. Another thing that is vital is with regards to a profit-driven and private healthcare. Now, this is something that is important not only in the healthcare but also in the education care. One thing was that when India became independent, India had a scarcity of resources. A large amount of its resources got diverted into wars. A number of them got diverted for ensuring food security. So health and education at that time suffered to some degree. Later, there was a privatization which was allowed both in health as well as in education. So it is because of this that some problems is what has been faced by the country. For example, the private sector has eroded some ethical values out of the medical system. We have seen that how private hospitals are charging so much out of patients. This is one ethical concern here. Another thing is that this private healthcare system has taken a large amount of the share of the qualified medical doctors in the country. So this is what has resulted in creating an artificial scarcity in the rural areas. So this is one important analysis here. Another thing is with regards to the medical education system. Now here the editorial discusses that the medical education system in the country has lost touch with the actual health needs of the country and it is extremely westernized. Now here this is something that you can also relate to the emphasis given by the Prime Minister on the Ayush. Not only that, the medical education system should be such and it should be a flexible system depending upon the needs of the country. So in that regard also, this idea of newer cadre of health professionals is something that is important. So that is the analysis here. Another thing is with regards to viability of short-term courses. Now, often it is criticized by experts that these courses will not be viable. So this is something that has been refuted too by the author here. He says that a newer medical curriculum, which is more relevant to the primary healthcare system, it is scientifically based. It is based on efficient training to the cadre. So it will definitely be viable. And not only that, the focus should not be on simply the merit of the candidate. Focus should be on the aptitude of the candidate. So that is something that is a good analysis here. Another thing is that it should this newer course, the short-term courses should also be made more vernacular. If a focus is laid that a person who is training in this should have some knowledge of vernacular languages, then this is again going to increase the viability of these courses and the relevance of this cadre. So that is an important analysis. It's a good idea which has been mooted here. Another thing is with regards to an issue of quacks. Now it is often said that these short-term courses will result in cheaply made poor quality doctors, and there will be a discrimination against the rural population who will be made to be treated by these quacks. So this is one criticism against this idea of newer cadre. So this is, however, discarded by the editorial. Here the author says that this is something that is unacceptable because indeed these newer cadre professionals will be specifically trained, and not only that, he also highlights that at present the medical curriculum also has some superfluous course. For example, they have a course in the forensic sciences which is of no relevance at the level of the primary healthcare. So if there is specific focus on primary healthcare, then indeed this cadre can be efficient. So that is one analysis which has been given. Another thing is that there is also an issue of competition between the LMPs and the MBBS doctors. Now this again the editorial particularly has discarded. Here the author has analyzed that the National Health Protection Scheme talks for some sub-center level wellness centers. So this is one important area which needs to be focused on, that this will be working subordinate to the primary healthcare. So the editorial here discusses that this newer cadre of LMPs should largely be concentrated in the sub-center level, and this will make healthcare system at the grassroots level, and further it will also reduce the burden of the primary healthcare, which then can be expanded to allow some more hospitalizations and some other important activities can be restored to the primary healthcare. There can be an MBBS doctor at the PHC level, but there should definitely be a grassroots level cadre of health professionals which can be provided by the LMP. So this is a structure what the editorial has discussed about, and this is something that even you can replicate in your answers. Doing this will also do away with some additional responsibilities, some ancillary responsibilities on the MBBS doctors. For example, they have to maintain records. All of these things can be done away with, and the skills can be put to better usage. Also, if the primary healthcare facilities are increased, then the viability will increase. This will result in increased remuneration for MBBS doctors, and this can make primary healthcare centers much more attractive for the MBBS doctors. So this is one other point which has been mentioned in the editorial. So that is the relevance here. Another analysis is with regards to career advancements for LMPs. Now, it is being often criticized that it might lead to a lack of career advancement for LMPs because then they will only be restricted to sub-center level. This again has been refuted in the editorial. It is said that the LMPs can also be offered some postgraduate courses which can allow them to grow in the healthcare system of the country. Not only that, these postgraduate LMPs can work as teachers in other LMP colleges, so there can be some career advancements for these courses also. So indeed, this editorial is a holistic analysis of this idea of new cadre of health professionals. Now, definitely there is severe criticism to this issue, but time and again in editorials we are seeing that the opinion is in the favor of them. So as a student, as in your answers also, you should not show a very closed approach to this idea, and rather you should have an open approach. So that is going to be the relevance here. Coming to the next article, for India, it should be neighborhood first. Now, the context here is, as always, it is the neighborhood first policy that India had been following. Now, you should know something in the background that in the year 2014, when Prime Minister Modi came into power, he immediately advocated this policy of neighborhood first. On his swearing-in ceremony, all the immediate neighbors of India were invited, but it is being seen that over the course of this present government, there has been a change in this policy, and now the focus is shifting from neighborhood first to the extended neighborhood policy. So that is the entire analysis, that is the entire context here. Now, coming to the issues which this particular editorial raises is that first and foremost, you need to know that India's salience in global matters is something that is rising. This can be recently seen that how 10 leaders from Asia visited India. This was a historic visit on the Republic Day. Also, the Prime Minister's recent visit to West Asia also shows that India has significant influence in this particular region. Also, India is being seen as a major stakeholder in the resolution of the Afghanistan issue. Not only that, even Quad, which India has formed with other like-minded countries, which include Japan, Australia, and the US, with these countries, Quad is being seen as a major power within the world now. So that is something that is important, which reflects India's salience in global matters. Another thing which is important here is with regards to the US policy vis-a-vis India. The US recently released its national security review, and there also US has called upon India to become a major leader. So that is something that you need to know in the analysis, that definitely India's importance in critical global matters is something that is on a rise. So this is the first analysis. The second analysis is with regards to an extended neighborhood versus immediate neighborhood policy. Now, in the extended neighborhood, what is included is the East Asian countries, that is this region, then the ASEAN, that is this region, and in the also the West Asia. So these are the three regions which can be included in the extended neighborhood of India. So this is something that is important for you to know. Now, there is a conflict between the extended neighborhood versus the immediate neighborhood, which comprises of all the SAARC countries or the South Asian countries. So this is something that is important. Now, in the past, as I mentioned before, we are seeing that India is focusing more on its extended neighborhood as compared to its immediate neighborhood. Now, this is one idea which the author has refuted. He has stressed that India's immediate neighborhood has direct impacts on India. Geostrategically, it has impact, geoeconomically, geopolitically. So that is something that is the importance, and India should focus more on its own neighbors. So that is the analysis here. One quote here is pertinent, that one can choose one's friends, but one cannot choose one's neighbors. So that is the spirit of this entire analysis. Next, coming to ASEAN is something that the author has analyzed in the editorial. Now, definitely India and ASEAN are having a good relation at present, and the relationship are on a rise. But there are some irritants in this relationship. For example, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, as we had discussed, was a major irritant. Also, the Belt and Road Initiative, of which many Asian countries are a partner, but India is not a partner to this. So that is one irritant. Also, the idea of Quad is something that several Asian countries are looking at with suspicion. So there are irritants in this relationship, but these irritants can be ignored both by ASEAN as well as by India. And in this backdrop also, India can continue to have a fulfilling partnership with ASEAN. So that is the first analysis. Another analysis is with regards to West Asia. A similar tendency is what is being seen in West Asia, where India is managing some tight diplomacy. For example, India is maintaining good relation in this region of conflict between Israel as well as with Palestine. Recently, the Prime Minister visited Palestine, and before that, it was the Israel's Prime Minister who had visited India. So if India is able to maintain good relation with both these belligerent nations, then in that case, it reflects that India is ignoring some deeper questions in West Asia, which India can afford to do. Also, India has a good relation both with Saudi Arabia and Iran, who are arch rivals in this region. So the entire crux of both these analyses is that in these areas, these being the extended neighborhood of India, some important concerns is what India can afford to ignore, simply because of the fact that these areas do not have an impact directly on India. However, in this light, the author is analyzing that this is not the privilege which India has with regards to South Asia. In South Asia, India cannot ignore some pertinent issues. For example, in Nepal, there is a change of government, and it is now the Left Alliance government under Prime Minister KP Oli which has come to power. India has traditionally not had a good relation with the past government which was headed by Prime Minister KP Oli. So some tensions is what is arising between India and Nepal is warming to China. So that is one cause of concern. Another thing with regards to Bangladesh is the political crisis which is now developing in Bangladesh, especially in the backdrop of the BNP leader Khalida Zia being accused in a corruption case. And so the now coming elections in Bangladesh, that is in the year 2019, it is feared that it will only be a single party election, that is that of the Awami League. So definitely there is some crisis in Bangladesh. Similar political crisis is what has arisen in Sri Lanka, where there is a conflict between the coalition government. So that is something that is important. Another aspect is with regards to Maldives, where there is both a political as well as a constitutional crisis, and India has major stakes in this because Maldives is largely warming up with China. Now here we had discussed previously also that China in the past has not even had an embassy in Maldives till the year 2011, whereas India has a long history of relations with Maldives. However, China has come to play as a major factor in Maldives. Now it is also that China is trying to make some military bases in the southern islands of Maldives. So this is a major threat concern for India. Another thing is with regards to China factor directly, that China has not only made its influence in Maldives, it has also made influence in Sri Lanka. The Hambantota port is going to be here. Also in the Djibouti Islands, now China is going to have its base in the Djibouti Islands. So all of these issues, the Gwadar port is something that China is going to have. So this is a string of pearls which China is creating surrounding India. Not only that, China has also built inroads into almost all of India's neighbors. So this is definitely a cause of concern for India, which India cannot ignore vis-a-vis its South Asian neighbors, or for that matter, its immediate neighborhood. So that is the analysis. Another thing is with regards to the immediate neighbor Pakistan. Now the relation with Pakistan are at an all-time low. This is something that we all know. There is continuous shelling and bombing at the LOC. There is a huge amount of bloodshed, and there is a loss of some of our our army officers. So this is a cause of concern which needs to be addressed, and it cannot be brushed aside. So that is one analysis which the editorial has made. Another aspect which has been analyzed is with regards to Afghanistan. Now the editorial here discusses that Afghanistan's position is worst ever since 1970s, and this is somehow reflecting that the state in Afghanistan has almost virtually collapsed, and this is something that is not to the welcoming of India, because India and Afghanistan has spent approximately $2 billion is what India has invested in Afghanistan. Also, India has civilizational links with Afghanistan. Now if Afghanistan as a state collapses, then these links is something that is going to be destroyed. So that is something that is important. Also, if Afghanistan breaks down and there is a rise of radicalism in Afghanistan, then this is something that can be a threat to India, as India can face terrorism from Afghanistan. So this is another analysis where the author is saying that India can not afford to ignore its immediate neighbors at the cost of its extended neighborhood. So that is the entire gist here. Further, the author gives a final opinion where he says that all the people in power, all the people who are the stakeholders, for example, the politicians, the bureaucrats, and all the diplomats of India, they should have a unanimity of purpose. And this should be with regards to the foreign policy priorities, which should be more aligned with the immediate neighborhood rather than the extended neighborhood. So that is the entire analysis here. A question can directly be asked that should India focus more on its extended neighborhood as compared to its immediate neighborhood, or what will be the fallout of the breakdown of SAARC? Such kind of issues are something that are very important in the present time. So that is the relevance here. So based on today's discussion, please try and attempt these questions. Please try and attempt them within a word limit of 150 words. So with this, we finish today's discussion. I thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you tomorrow.